Because what people often say about a coaching ourselves session, as I myself am standing here thinking about the conversation we had just now at the end of Charles's session, how lovely it is to talk with people. It's not only good learning, it's nice to do. It feels good. And that's why I've given the title for this session, The Aesthetics of Power. Because by aesthetics, I mean the whole person experience of these things, the whole person experience, not only the sort of cognitive. So this, I don't know if you had a chance to look through this Wordle. Anything strike you about? This is the outcome of a part of a survey we did of 380 people in one particular sector around the UK, asking them on the traits and behaviours they feel describe their leaders. Size is number of responses, exactly. Lacking integrity, yeah. Little ethical, yep. Yeah. Anything else? Generally negative. The comments are generally negative. Well, strategic, visionary, committed, ruthless. Maybe ruthless is good. It's very hard to know, though, isn't it? I mean, like, is ambitious good or bad? If you're talking about your leaders, you might say they're really ambitious. Well, are you saying that's great, they're ambitious for all of us to succeed and do well, or you say they're ambitious for their own glory? What does it mean? But I think what this shows, it shows a lot of things actually, but one of the things it shows is a tremendous ambivalence about our leaders. That it's not, we're not going to love them all, and the people who get into leadership are people who get there for all kinds of mixed motives, and we of course know that in ourselves. That succeeding at something is great, feels good, and part of the feeling of good is often beating someone else to it. And most management jobs, most consulting jobs, you're competing for it. And winning the job, is nice if you wanted the job and you get it, but it's also nice that you were preferred over others. Sibling rivalry and envy is not something that finishes at the age of 16 or 18 or whenever you leave home. It carries on in the dynamics of every organization, of every family and every movement. So these feelings associated with organizational life are, of course, powerful and significant, and they're not necessarily easily categorized into good and bad. That's not my aim, yeah. Yeah, but so people look at it and think, which of these do I see and which do I identify with? So part of this is a kind of choice of how do I want to experience myself? What aspects of myself? Oh, I'm so sorry. So this is a question saying, she said she sees so many managers, particularly younger people, who are very themselves unsure whether they want to go into this kind of life, which is so exhausting and wearing and feels like it's not going to be much fun. Is that right? Yeah. So this is what I'm going to talk about here. And I'm going to do this by talking about three really powerful images in sort of across most civilizations, but particularly I'm taking images from sort of Western Greco-Roman civilizations that I think speak to some intrinsic dynamics in leadership and management. Does anybody know who this is a picture of? Janus, yeah, and who's Janus? A god of duality, deceit. No, actually, he was officially god of war. in Rome, and in fact the temple of Janus is still there. It's a doorway, and it has a doors in it, and the doors would be closed at times of peace. And in 1,000 years of the Roman Empire, the doors were closed for 40 days. Yeah. Sir Charles Varney, who was head of the British Civil Service for many years, once said about you referring to Janus, said, he was talking about political leaders, but I guess it would go for leaders generally. A political leader, he said, must be like Janus, facing two ways, inside and outside. Inside the organization, outside. But I guess there was a kind of implication that political leaders are two-faced. There's what they show you and what they're thinking inside. But in fact, that's the case for most of us. Two-facedness. So when we desire authenticity and truthfulness, we know that it's a problem. It's problematic. But in leadership, I think it's problematic in a very special and particular way. And this is because the people we follow, the people we actually look to give our trust and acquiescence and agreement and so on, we do because they represent something of us, of what we value in. The reason we come together, for example, reason we've come together here around the coaching ourselves thing is, and the reason we accept the leadership and direction of Phil and Henry is because we feel they represent, they're standing for, they're speaking for, and they're enacting something that each of us feels to be valuable and important and is a significant part of our work. So if you're going to be leading others, you have to put significant effort into asserting and affirming a subjective unity, usness. We are us. I know you and you know me. We are part of the same thing. We're doing this together. We are creating an usness. We're creating a social identity. If I don't do that, if I'm simply using you as a resource, as an object for my own ends, you experience that as deeply untrustworthy and often as a betrayal. But as a leader, you must do that. Because as a leader in an organization, you are obliged to think, what resources do we really need in order to do this job? So at the same time as I'm asserting, we are us, we're one, I also must be thinking, you may not always be part of me. Now, we as followers know that's the case. We may not want to remember it. We may prefer to be caught up in a charismatic enthusiasm. We may like to believe that to be the case, but we also intuitively know this is a fantasy. In fact, we would be disappointed if our leaders were not capable of seeing us as objects, because it would mean the task for which we come together is not the primary purpose. It would be confusing a work organization with a kind of family organization, a kind of family feeling. Task, it would be confusing task with sentience, task with feeling. So the dynamic of betrayal is built into leadership. Betrayal is primarily where you are brought into being a subjective, where we have a relationship, a connection of intimate subjectivity, but then find we are treated as an object. we are objectified. This is deeply hurtful. And I'm sure we all have experiences in life of finding ourselves having been treated as an object. And it's very hurtful. And I imagine most of us, probably all of us, have the experience that we have put ourselves in the position of doing that to others. And it's shameful and guilt. So we carry these with us, but it is inherent to leadership and to those authority relations. So when we're thinking about leadership development, we must be thinking about developing the capacity to survive this kind of difficult dynamic. Is it clear? And I think it begins from birth, because as a tiny baby, when you're born, your survival depends on the capacity to relate somehow with others. And from the mother's breast onwards, that intimacy and connectedness. But to grow up, you have to come to see and to recognize that your mother's breast is not part of you. You have to relate to it. You have to, and what's more than that, sometimes, mother is nice to you and sometimes she's not there. She betrayed you. In feeling, it's not a thinking thing, that's the experience. So I think this is built in to us, and our capacity to live with that is something that we call maturity. If we say this is the term used yesterday was a mature organization, or a mature management, a mature institution, is one which has the capacity to sustain itself in spite of these feelings. And a mature response to a threat, to difficulty, to crisis is one which is not thrown off course by these kinds of feelings, but able to contain it and sustain it and carry on. So but those emotional feelings, they're not done with, they don't go away, and and we all have different upbringings and different names, but I think this sense of the betrayal about objectification is inherent to becoming a person. So we deal with it, and it's really brought up in authority relations, of course, because of the dependency and power. Anybody know who this is? This is another very ancient, important. Hercules and the Hydra, it is indeed, yeah. So this is the Hydra, which is the many-headed snake. It was, I think, the second of the 12 tasks of Hercules. And if you remember, the Hydra had one immortal head and many other heads, and every time one would be cut off, 3 more would grow in its place. So this is a foresight of email. Because every time you deal with one and press send, you know it's going to be just a few minutes before 3 more come back at you, especially if you're foolish enough to copy anybody else into it. But of course, it's also like action in general. If you're leading and managing, the point of leading and managing is to do things, make stuff happen. Do things. And we look to people who lead us to be people who make more things happen, who create more possibilities, more opportunities, who create more Hydra heads that then we sort of are persecuted with more jobs to do, more things, more burdens, more, the to-do list gets longer and longer, more things to wake up with at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking, oh, God, when am I going to do that? And all of this. We do it to ourselves. And I think this is inherent in leading and managing, of course. It's about making more stuff that then burdens us with it. But Hercules did actually defeat the Hydra. Do you know how? Anybody know how? Well, it's just in the corner of this picture here. If you look right in the far corner here, you can see another hand coming in, another arm. Can you see right in the corner there? And this is the arm of Iolaus, his charioteer, who came with a burning stick. And every time Hercules swiped one off, Iolaus would and stop it from growing back again. And one by one, they went through it, doing the thing. So this is the personal assistant, who filters your email for you, who says, no, you really don't need to go to that meeting. I think it's not so important, or something. Or the colleague, or the other person. And maybe this is the other people in the Coaching Ourselves group who say to you, come on, you don't really need to do that, or I think it's fine as it is. That's some of the best advice, isn't it, ever? You don't really need to do that. And it's one of the few tasks that Hercules did here, which he could not do on his own. Very important, this, because of course, the heroic character is about action and forward moving. But the prevention of the consequences of action, or the control of the consequences of action, is really, really hard to do oneself. So this is why, this is in a sense another way in which leadership is inherently sort of self-destructive, because it creates more results and effects that prevent you from taking a lead unless you work with others, unless you have your charioteer, your PA, or your friendly consulting group. So I think this is the ability to have that kind of relationship with working partnerships with other people is what gives rise to effective leadership. It's the partnership part of it. Anybody recognize this piece? Damien Hirst, yes, it's Damien Hirst's. What you're feeling looking at this piece? Repulsive? Repulsive, yeah. Anything else? Grotesque? Anybody excited by it? Thinks it's thrilling? No, sometimes people do. Some people love it, yeah. Bling bling, yeah. So it's a very interesting piece, actually. It's a skull. He found the skull in a shop and he took a cast of it and cast a platinum copy of the original, and then put the teeth into the platinum copy and then covered it with all these diamonds, including the one big one in the middle. Somewhere around £14 million worth of diamonds and platinum in that, in raw materials. It's called For the Love of God. For the Love of God. And he explains the title, where he said, when he went home one day to visit his mother, and his mother said, "What are you doing, Damien?" He said, "Oh, I'm sticking some diamonds on a skull." And his mum said, "Oh, for the love of God, whatever next?" But the piece was made and it was exhibited at the White Cube Gallery in Whitechapel in London with a price tag of £50 million on it. It wasn't sold. It was exhibited in New York, where it did sell for the dollar equivalent of £52 million. That disappeared from view for a while, and occasionally it would come out for exhibitions, but basically it was nobody knew where. And then last year, 2014, it was revealed that it had been bought by a company that was 40%, I think, or 30% owned by Nomura Bank, and the rest was shadowy as to who it was had owned the rest. And it turned out that the main other shareholder was, any guesses? Trump? No. Damien Hirst. He sold it and he still owns it. So what he and this story, is part of course, the continuing artwork in some way, the aesthetic of the piece, and I put it up there because I think it's something about this other aspect of leadership, which is to do with gaining something, with getting it, with the fruits with reaching an objective, reaching goals, getting what you set out to do, and in so doing, somehow this becomes empty. Because I think this is, of course, about death and the emptiness of the bling and the things we achieve. And one of the, I think, great sort of tragedies of life, and especially for those of us who sort of aspire to succeed in things, is that we start out, most of us from young age, very ideal, with great ideals. I'm really going to change the world. I'm going to make the world fun. I'm going to make, you start out very young. I'm going to make everybody love everybody, and there'll be no cruelty to animals. And then, after a little bit later, it becomes, maybe something like, I'm going to ensure that every child goes through education with creativity and beauty around them and the ability to be themselves. And a few years later, when you do your training as teaching, I'm going to make sure everybody passes their SATs. And maybe a little bit later, it comes, I'm going to make sure we get ranked in the top 10 in our provincial schools. That's my objective. And ideals become converted into objectives. And ideals into objectives, into goals. To some extent, this is a kind of defensive reaction, because we're not going to do this for everything for all kids, so let's just do something that's doable. But also we know it's a kind of compromise. It's a wearing down of that spiritual sense of the world as good. And of course, even Damien Hirst can't take any of this with him into the grave, and that's, I guess, a lot of what this piece is about. So leadership relations, the whole issue of success, is inherently problematic in ways that we, of course, don't talk about normally at work, but it's present for all of us, and we know it. And the older we get, and perhaps the more philosophical we become, let's say, I would say philosophical as a way of avoiding saying cynical, we come to this is there in it and referring to these things and the end of stuff, death, and the emptiness of our achievements is really one of the no-nos of talking about leadership development normally. But actually, in coaching ourselves, my experience in coaching ourselves session, one can talk a bit about these things. One can talk about failure. One can talk about that most difficult of things, of impotence, our inability to carry off what we wanted to, our inability to connect. And these are the realities of life, of experience. Who of us has not experienced this in some way and found ways to deal with it? So one way of defending us, I don't know if this piece, anybody recognize this? This is by Ai Weiwei, the Chinese artist, and it's hundreds of thousands of little clay sunflower seeds, each one individually painted, laid out in the Turbine Hall at the Tate Gallery, Tate Modern in London. And one, of course, response to all of this is to kind of distance ourselves from the difference and just see everything the same and kind of cut ourselves off from it. But I hope what we might be able to do more is begin to get this kind of more, no one recognize this piece? Picasso, yeah. This is a picture of his lover at the time, Jacqueline. And some people find this really ugly or puzzling. I think it's the most beautiful picture, and the more I look at it, the more I like it, because it's so appreciative of her complexity and of her difference. It's not requiring her to be one thing, it has both the outside and an inside, a self-regard. It's almost like the Janus picture. Is it two people or one person? It's in that sense ambiguous and appreciative, and I think deeply loving. But that's my response. Other people have different responses. That's why I wanted to show this picture. And I think that's the kind of valuing of others that we have to bring in to our organizational development and management development. And because I'm kind of approaching the time I'm supposed to finish, I think I won't say too much more about that, because I think that, in a way, this is for me the icon of what I think the coaching ourselves approach is trying for. The possibility of relating to each other and to our work, recognizing the Janus-like character, the Janus dynamics that we're caught up in, recognizing the hopelessness of rest, that we are going to continue cutting off the heads of the Hydra and seeking an Iolaus to help us. That where we succeed in being heroic, it's because we accept our dependency on others, as he did. That the great things we achieve, that we desire and we achieve, our achievements are really just hard rock. But also kind of exciting and interesting and stimulating and bling and shiny and open up other kind of chances for us. And that this kind of, our response to this will be this kind of loving complexity of, and in my view, this is why coaching ourselves works, because it enables this kind of relationships and relatedness with others. So my very final thing is just a little bit of a plug, is that in May next year, I'm running here a 1-week program called Roundtable for Practicing Managers, which involves both the coaching ourselves and the friendly consulting activity and a number of other, the infant observation activities, a whole host of other things that I think are together kind of integral for living in that kind of way of relating, and exemplifies that sort of management and leadership development. So the dates up there. And we'll be working that with Henry and a bunch of other people from around the world, Japan and India and China and so on will be here. So if anybody's interested in joining us for that, you'd be very welcome to do so. That's it.
So in some ways, the relationship between us and leadership, which is this fantasy of the next Messiah, we often say, simply we had the wrong leader, and so if we have the next leader who's going to be the better leader, then we'll finally get our fantasies fulfilled. So maturity is, if I am willing to be a follower, I need to do that in the face of the fact that even though you care for me, you have to realize you're going to betray me or sacrifice me at some point. And you as a leader have to be aware of that even though you care for me, eventually you may betray me. And so you have to live with the guilt, and I have to live with the anger. In the face of that, decide to go forward. Anyway.
Yes.
Is that capture?
Yes, that's
Very
right.
close.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the optimistic view. No, I think when you say it's the reality of it, I think that's the hard part of the deeper work that you have to do.
Yeah.
If we're going to have that kind of maturity as we talk.
That's right. And to get to this kind of mature perspective, we could, if you're out on your own, feeling caught up, disappointment, then it's very hard to do it. But with others, you can do it. You can contain that. So the friendly consulting table, the group, the circle, really represents that possibility of containment. If you're familiar with the work of Winnicott and others of the analysts. Sorry, there's a question here, and then I'll come back. Yeah.
I was just going to share that I did a study with new managers, so they had become managers, leaders within the last, 1 to 2 years of their career. And one thing that was across the board when they shared going from an individual contributor to a leader for the first time in their careers, they were all struck with how big the effect was on who used to be their peers are now people, they talked about isolation. They talked about, how that really surprised me. So that impact, internally as well as in their career was way bigger than they thought.
Yeah, to step out from being one of the family,
Yeah.
one of the siblings to becoming that.
Head of household,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah, and stand up. Sometimes you have to realize that you are lonely as a leader. You are lonely, but you need to have people in your background. But sometimes I also think about you have to take concern of the community instead of the individual worker. And that's what you were talking about, betraying the individual. But you are true to the community.
Yes, and at that point, that's when it's kind of acceptable.
Yeah, exactly. Then you can go on further.
That's right.
Because you know, why am I doing this?
That's right.
And then you can have some peace inside.
Yeah, because, of course, I joined the community. If I join the community as a member of your team, or you, I join it. There may be some sense of my admiration for you, or whatever, respect, or whatever, but also I join it because of something rational. I can be a contributor to a joint task, and that task focus is very important in the work, and that's what allows that to happen. So it's as much a betrayal for you to say, we really don't need your work anymore, but stay here because I like you. That's also betrayal for the community, and also actually for me in a different kind of way. But what it means is, as a leader, either way, you can't avoid that. So going back to that list at the beginning, when I say ruthless, is this a pro or a con? Is it good or bad? Well, not straightforward.
It's like the ambition.
Like the ambition. I'm slightly over time. I'm not sure if Estelle is here yet. But yeah. Thank you very much. Oh, hello there.